This is Sarah, and I thought today I would talk a bit about the books that I read last year. I know it's nearly the end of February, but I don't really think it's ever too late to talk about books or to reflect about the year that just passed. So, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be ranking all the books that I read in 2023 on 5 different categories and giving my quick thoughts on them. The 5 categories that I will be ranking them in are ew, meh, it was fine, thoroughly enjoyed it, and top tier. This doesn't necessarily correlate with 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stars. In fact, I don't think I gave any of the books that I read last year 1 star. And also, there are some 5 stars that I put in the thoroughly enjoyed it category and some 4 stars that I put in the top tier category. Within each tier, I'm not gonna be ranking them in any particular order. Disclaimer that these are absolutely subjective and truly just for fun more than anything else. Generally, I prefer reading things in the original language if I am fluent in that language, but I don't sweat it, especially with things that are a little bit less serious. Like if I'm reading a little cozy mystery, I don't mind reading it in translation. I would let you know more about that for each book if that played a role in my enjoyment of the book or whatever. Also, before I get any further, I wanted to address that I sound like I have a cold, and that is because I have really bad allergies this week. The plants where I live have decided that spring came, and they came full force, and I've been pretty sick whole week. I've had a really hard time sleeping or getting any breathing done, really. But I think I'm gonna be okay. So, without further ado, let's get in with the books from the first tier. Ew. The tier Ew has only 2 books. Really, these aren't books that are objectively the worst of everything that I read, but they are books that for some reason or other have gained my hate. The first book in the Ew tier is The Tree of Yoga by Iyengar. This is a book about the theory of yoga, let's say. The problem I had with this book was that the first chapter was deceptively good, and from then on it just spiraled really deep with a lot of sexist views and pseudo-medical advice that I just cannot handle in this day and age. Ew. The second and last book in Ew is, sadly, Violeta by Isabel Allende. I was really excited to read Isabel Allende. I don't know why I picked this one particularly. I think I just saw it in my bookstore and it was really cheap because it's a mass paperback, and I thought, why the heck not? This is the first thing I read by Isabel Allende. And to be honest, I'm sad I picked this because I don't feel like reading anything else. This is basically the life story of a woman that was born during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1920 and passed away during the more recent pandemic of 2020. And I hate it because it played with my feelings. It made me cry so much, and then it toyed with me. The first part of the book was really boring. I had a really hard time getting through it. I don't know how I pushed through. Towards the middle of the book, I started to feel for the main character and I started to really cry. But then it just kept going and going, and I found myself rolling my eyes so hard that I was worried they would get stuck inside of my skull, because it would just keep going. It would just keep going. I feel like I wasted my time reading this. That's why I resent it so much, and that is why it gets the ew. Okay, moving on to the second category. Meh. These are books that I don't hate, I don't have any strong feelings for, but it would have made no difference if I didn't read them, honestly. The first in this category I read in Spanish, and its English title is Candy Cane Murder. This is the second installment in a cozy mystery series that I bought because I thought the cover was cute. It was really short. I already had the first book of the series, and I hadn't read it when I bought this, because if I had read it, I probably wouldn't have bought this. I didn't love the first book in this series, but I read this one because, one, I already had it, and two, I was kind of curious how the romantic subplot of the first book would play out, and this was just a disappointment. It was just as badly written as the first. There is really no development of the romantic subplot in this particular volume, and this one isn't really a murder mystery. It's just like a small town mystery. I'm not a huge fan of this. I'm not gonna continue this series, sadly. I will elaborate a bit more on this series when I talk about the first book. Second in the meh category is this little poetry collection by Gabriela Mistral called Ecstasies. Gabriela Mistral was, I think, a Chilean poet. Yes, a Chilean poet from the 20th century. And the problem I had with this collection is that I was baited by this cover. And I was baited by the reputation that Gabriela Mistral has nowadays. I feel like she's regarded as some sort of female love heroine. And I thought I was gonna read some beautiful, romantic, sapphic poetry, and this more resembles a nun's sexual fantasy. Like, the amount of references to Jesus in this book are mind-blowing. In this case, I think it's more of a me problem, that I was expecting something different. The writing is not bad or anything, and there are a couple of poems in here that have some images that really stuck with me after this. But it's like one or two out of a bunch of poems that I could not get. So again, not badly written, just not my cup of tea. Meh. The next one in meh is People We Meet on Vacation. I'm not a big romance reader. In fact, I don't think I'm a romance reader at all. But I just thought this was so boring. I finished it because, honestly, it was really easy to read. I could not relate to the main character at all. I thought she was stuck up and conceited. When I feel like reading romance, what I'm looking for is a story where I will connect with the characters, and I will desire with my whole heart that the characters get a happy ending, and that they, and that they end up together. But in this story, I literally didn't care, because, to be honest, I wanted them to get run over by a truck, not to get together. Not a bad book, just not for me. I found the whole thing with the traveling and the, blog kind of silly. I don't know. I might read another Emily Henry if the setting is completely different, but this was not it for me. So People We Meet on Vacation, meh. Next up, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. This book could have been an article. I don't think this book gives bad advice. I think it's pretty good advice. It was just really repetitive. So, meh. Lastly, in meh category is Another short poetry collection. I read a lot of these poetry collections this year, you will see. And this one is called Ya no será. And it's a collection of poems by Vilariño. I was gonna put this on, it was fine, but then I realized that I don't remember anything about it. So for being the least memorable book that I read in 2023, it gets the meh. Alright, moving on to It Was Fine. The first book in the category, It Was Fine, is Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder. Or in Spanish, Unas galletas de muerte. Honestly, the translations from this collection, they're not it. This is a cozy mystery that I bought because a Spanish publisher released a collection of 3 of them, and I got all 3. And this was objectively the worst of all 3. It's just badly written. It's a small town mystery where there's a murder, and our main character owns a cafe where she makes tons of cookies, and somehow that's how she makes a living in a small town, and somehow she still has time to full-time investigate a murder. The policeman, so the detective in this story, tells the main character to please help him investigate the murder. And it seems like he does absolutely nothing, and she's just going around playing spy the small town, giving everyone cookies. And the whole story happens, I think, in the span of less than a week. So unless this girl has like 60 hours in a day, I don't know how she managed to do all that. The best part about this book was the romantic subplot, which I thought was kind of funny. But that accounted for less than like 20% of the book. So yeah, it was fine. But I won't continue the series. Thankfully for my pocket. The next book in this rank is Tales of Tricks and Treats by Enid Blyton. This is a very cute collection of short stories written by none other than Enid Blyton herself. I read this kind of as research because there was a time when I thought I would really like to write little stories for children. This was just really pretty. It's 30 stories all about pixies and fairies and brownies and witches. Each of them has like a little morale at the end, and I don't know, it's just very well written, very cute, but nothing crazy, so it was fine. I liked it. Next up, more mystery. If you haven't noticed by now, I do love reading my mysteries. This is Miss Marple's 13 Problems by Agatha Christie. I enjoyed this. It was fun. I think you should read this if you want to feel dumb, or you like the idea of reading a murder mystery, but you don't want the commitment of reading a whole novel because then you'll stay up all night reading that said novel. This is really good for you then, because it's just 13 stories that are really easy to read, really fast to read, so you can just get to the end of the story and go to sleep and have a little mystery in your day. So it was fine. Not mind-blowing, but I like it. Next up is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney, which sadly I read in Spanish. Now, this is the first thing that I read by Sally Rooney, and it was fine. I found really different how the relationships between all of the characters were represented. I just thought it was realistic. Kind of opposite to people we meet on vacation. That was absolutely unrelatable. This was a tiny bit more relatable, but I didn't connect on a super strong level with any character. That's why I think it was fine. And also because I think I read it in Spanish. So, in summary, I wish I read this in English, but still, it was fine. Next up, this is a non-fiction book called Art History, A Brief Introduction. I kind of just saw this in the bookstore and thought it looked cool. Mainly I picked it up because towards the beginning, there is a picture of Mario, and I thought this is totally up my alley. For how tiny this book is, this really packs a punch. After reading this, I felt like my understanding of art completely changed, and not just fine art, but any creation in general, and particularly how we present art. This book made me really aware of the biases that we commit when we present art nowadays in any form, in museums, in galleries, in the internet. I wish it had a bit more practical examples and less philosophical rambling, but that is just my cup of tea. It may be your cup of tea if you're very into philosophy. Just a heads up, this is not a book about any particular history of art through time. This is a book about art history as an academic discipline. I had that confused at the beginning, but I was gladly surprised. This book, it was fine. The other two books in this category, it was fine. I read on ebook, so I don't have physical copies. The first of them is another of those short poetry collections. This one has poetry by Emily Dickinson, and it's called Morí por la belleza, or in English something like I died for beauty. This was my first introduction to Emily Dickinson. I didn't particularly connect much, but I did find a lot of beautiful imagery in the poetry. This book made me excited to read Emily Dickinson in the original English, so I'm hoping to do that this year. So yeah, it was fine. Lastly, the last book in this category is Legends and Lattes. I used to be a pretty big fantasy reader when I was a teenager, and I haven't really read much fantasy in the past years. You probably already know this book. It kind of kickstarted the cozy fantasy trend that's been going on a lot recently. It's a story about a retired orc that decides to open a coffee shop. The thing I liked most about this book is that there are a lot of characters of many different species. I just wish I got to know them a little bit better. I do like my books to be quite character driven, and this book was not particularly plot driven, and I also didn't think it delved on the characters enough for my taste. So that's really my only criticism. I think this book is a great escape from the real world, especially if you want to read something a bit more chill and not read about an epic war that's about to end the world, but you want to read some fantasy. This was fine. All right, next category. Thoroughly enjoyed it. These are very nice books that I strongly recommend. First in this tier is another one of the cozy mysteries in this collection. I mean, just look at them side by side. If you'd seen these at the store, wouldn't you have bought them too? That's really what got me into them, the covers, and that I like reading murder mysteries. Duh. In my opinion, this is the best of the three in the first initial release. This one's called Murder Past Due in English, a cat in the stacks mystery. In it, you're following a guy that works, I think it was in a library, cataloging artifacts. And he has a Maine Coon cat, and he takes him everywhere. And there is a strange murder somewhere around his university, and he takes it upon himself to figure out what is going on. As a mystery, this was pretty good, but I did not find the characters to be memorable, so I don't really feel like continuing this series. However, if you like the idea of the main character's sidekick being a huge Maine Coon that he takes around literally everywhere on a leash, you might like this. Murder Past Due. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Also, in translation, Carrie Soto is back. The latest installment in the Mick Riva universe of stories written by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was really good. It was engaging, easy to read, heartbreaking. It is not my favorite book of Taylor's, but I thought it was really good. If you need a story that will tell you to believe in yourself, but also accept change and accept love, you should read this. I thought the ending was beautiful and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. But I always enjoy Taylor Jenkins Reid, so. Next up in thoroughly enjoyed it is Normal People by Sally Rooney. My second Sally Rooney, this time in English. This made me regret reading Beautiful World, Where Are You in Spanish. I can't say I related to any of the characters in this story. In fact, I found them quite unrelatable, but I thought the depiction of a relationship between two people over the span of their teenage years and adulthood was very well done, and honestly, the prose in this book at times felt like reading poetry. It was really beautiful. There are some images in this book that are very evocative. I wish I had tabbed this because I am incapable of finding my favorite quote from this book. I know I underlined it, but I didn't tab it, so I can't find it. Anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's pretty tragic, but very beautiful too. Very deep. Normal People by Sally Rooney. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, on to another fantasy that I read in 2023. Tres of the Emerald Sea. I originally read this in Spanish because I borrowed it from the library, and then my family gifted this to me for Christmas, and I am very happy about it because it's so precious. Anyways, this book is a really fun adventure. If you like wacky magic and pirates, you should read this. This is kind of what I needed to read at the time. I was in a little bit of a slump, and I think this book is really what got me back into reading fantasy, which I'm reading a lot of these days. So, thoroughly enjoyed it. For another book that I read as an ebook, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, I read this in English, and at first, I was having a really hard time. I'm glad that I read it on an ebook because it was very easy to just highlight words and search them up on the dictionary. But it was quite a challenge. I hadn't really read a lot of classics in English, at least not that old. I don't think I had read anything in English older than maybe 20th century. So this was kind of a challenge, but I felt really proud of myself when I finished it, and really towards like the 20% mark I caught up some speed. This book was nothing like what I was expecting. I thought it was really witty. It was kind of random at times. The characters are just so obnoxious, but I had a great time, and I am looking forward to reading more Jane Austen this year. So Pride and Prejudice, thoroughly enjoyed it. The last book that I thoroughly enjoyed this year is a nonfiction, Still Like an Artist. 10 Things Nobody Told You About Being Creative. This book is so short, and it's so worth it, and I think everybody should read it, regardless of whether you think you're creative or not. This is really a book about doing whatever you want, about finding your calling, about finding satisfaction in life. If you feel like you need some motivation in your life, or you don't know what to do with your life, you should read this book. Really, you should read this book regardless. You should just read this book. It's so short. It takes less than 3 hours to get through this thing. And I don't think anything in it is repetitive or unnecessary. Just a really solid book. Plus, it has some very nice doodles. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Alright, so to end the rankings is the top tier books of 2023. These are the best of the best. La crème de la crème. There is really no particular reason why these books are at the top and not in thoroughly enjoyed it, other than I just feel more emotionally attached to them. So without further ado, the first book in top tier is not a book, but in fact, a whole ass series. I read the 6 first books of the Agatha Racing series this year in translation. And to me, this is the epitome of cozy mysteries. This is what every other cozy mystery that I read is competing up against. I started reading this on ebooks that I got from the library, and then when I got really involved in it, I started buying the books. That's why I have 5, 6, and also 7, but 7 I did not read in 2023. The titles of all of the books that I read last year in English are Agatha Racing and the Quiche of Death, Agatha Racing and the Vicious Vet, Agatha Racing and the Potted Gardener, Agatha Racing and the Walkers of Dembley, Agatha Racing and the Murderous Marriage, Agatha Racing and the Terrible Tourist. This is a comedic cozy mystery series set in the English country. I love the humor, I love the characters, they're so unhinged, and the mysteries are engaging. And first of all, they take time to be resolved. Our main character isn't trying to help the police. A lot of the times she just is directly involved into these murders, and she has to basically investigate to save her own ass. And I just love them. The main character is not particularly likable, but I think she's so funny. The things that happen to her are so ridiculous. There's a bit of a romantic subplot in here that is just hysterically funny. Agatha Racing, top tier. The second book in the top tier category is, again, not a book. It's a manga, and not a single manga, but a whole lot of them. And that is tomes 29 through 34 of Attack on Titan. Technically, this was half of a reread because I had already read tomes 29 and 30, which is this one. I'm only holding this one because it's my favorite. But after I read this, I had to stop because I liked this tome so much that I was worried that it would go downhill from there. But it did not, which is why Attack on Titan, the last arc, is top tier. If you don't know Attack on Titan because you somehow never heard of the anime or the manga, this is a very dark story, pretty gory too, about a group of people that live behind very, very tall walls, beyond which there are huge human-eating titans. And that is all I can tell you without spoiling you, because this story is just so much more than that. And I love it. And you should consider watching the anime if you have not. And if you think you might like it. Top tier, Attack on Titan. Love it. Switching gears a little bit, let's go back to my roots to Gothic literature, and this is Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. I thankfully read this in English because, oh my god. Like Sally Rooney, this prose is borderline poetry. It should be forbidden to write this good, but somehow Sheridan Le Fanu does. If you like vampires, if you like girls stuck in mansions, you should read this. This story is thrilling, is passionate, is violent, it's got everything. Honestly, better than Dracula. I'm sorry. Possibly. I mean, I have not read Dracula, but better than the movie. And I love the movie. I love the Dracula movie. It's like one of my top 10 movies of all time. This might be better. So, Carmilla, top tier. Moving on, another dark story. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is not my first Shirley Jackson, but I think this might be my favorite. Sadly, I had been spoiled a very important part of the plot of this book, but I don't think it stifled my enjoyment of it. My favorite part of this book is the main character's inner monologue, which is just so dark, so childish, so relatable, scarily enough sometimes. I don't know, I just think this story is gutting. Like, I felt so much pain reading this, which is exactly how I want to feel when I read something like this. It has been described as dark cottagecore, and I can see why. It is dark cottagecore. It is grim cottagecore. It is nightmare cottagecore. But I love it. Top tier. As almost anything Shirley Jackson writes. Top tier. The next book in this category is another short poetry collection, this one by Sappho. The title in Spanish is No creo poder tocar el cielo con las manos, which means I don't think I'm able to touch the sky with my hands. This teeny tiny poetry collection single-handedly made me sign up for a classic Greek course, just so I could read it in Greek. It never ceases to amaze me how poetry written by a girl thousands of years ago can be so relatable and just so pretty. What I'm about to say might be controversial, might be heresy even, but it kind of reminded me of Rupi Kaur. In the best way. I just cannot recommend Sappho enough. Please give her a try. There's only a handful of poems that she wrote that have survived, and it's really worth it. It's really beautiful. I love it. So evocative. Top tier poetry. And lastly, the last book in the top tier category is a nonfiction, and that nonfiction is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. This book made me so aware of how my internal mind works that I think it might be illegal. It made me realize a lot of the internal beliefs and blocks that I have, for which I didn't even have vocabulary. And thanks to Brené Brown, now I do. And that is just so powerful. It took me a really long time to get through this book because it hit me so hard that I actually had to pause and give it a break for a couple months. So yeah, if you're looking to understand yourself better and to understand others better, if you're looking to create a more meaningful life for yourself and you find yourself incapable because you don't know what to do, read this. If you want to be more kind to yourself, if you want to be more kind to others, read this. I just don't have enough praise for this book. One of the best non-fictions I've ever read. Especially self-help books, which tend to be deplorable. This one is top tier. So that's it. That's all the books I read in 2023, which makes a total of 36 books. I'm gonna get a little bit vulnerable with you now, and I'm gonna tell you that I struggled to reach my goal of 36 books last year. That's why I read so much manga, and that's, well, mainly Attack on Titan, and that's why I read so many short poetry collections, because I was trying so hard to reach that goal. But now, in retrospect, I understand that I had a bit of a rough year last year, personally, and that is why I wasn't really in the mood for reading for quite a few months. 36 is kind of a low number for me, especially considering how many really short books I read, but I'm really happy that I still managed to read despite my life situation in that moment. And moral of the story is, don't let a number dictate your worth or how you feel about yourself. Whether you read 100 books a year or 5 books a year, both can be a win depending on your circumstances and your goals. So, with that said, I'm looking forward reading a lot this year, 2024. I already read a lot. I think I already read like 12 books, and it's not even the end of February. But I'm feeling very good about myself, and that is why. And I don't think for the rest of the year I'll keep reading at this pace, and that's okay. If I reach 36 books this year, I'll be ecstatic. But if I don't, that's gonna be fine too. Let me know what are some books that you read last year. What are some books that you hated? What are some books that you loved? What is your top tier? What is your ew? Which books were fine? And what do you think of the books that I shared with you today? Do you completely disagree? Do you agree with some of my views? Let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, consider subscribing. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye!